Alright.
Okay.
Yes, we're going to be doing this entire series in a new language.
Alright. Hello, my name is Madeline McNeill. I am a body philosopher, I am a singer, and this is a Body Talk series that I'm doing with my friend Amanda Maule, and Amanda edited my book, Is There a Soul? And we've been talking about these kinds of topics for a while. She is...
I'm a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing with an emphasis in poetry through Eastern Washington University. I also did a DIY degree in humor theory that I didn't defend because I needed more I needed more teachy stuff instead of figure it out yourself stuff. So it's basically linguistics, rhetoric, stand-up comedy, just trying to figure out kind of humor theories. And I think I've got some stuff for our next talk. I'm really excited about a new topic.
Sweet.
Yeah.
I'm excited too.
Yeah. It'd be that supposed dialogue thing. So look forward to that. Yeah. I'm really jazzed about it. I feel like I discovered something.
That's great.
Yeah.
Today we're going to try doing a couple of topic sets, and this first one is going to be on the mind, which is something that I've been trying to articulate for a while, and so we'll just hash it out and see. And then the second one we're going to do on persona, which Amanda suggested, and it's really interesting. I was thinking about that.
I think that they can really kind of come together, and it'll depend on basically how we move through the mind, because persona is an imagined quality, an imagination that moves into behaviors. Mm-hmm. So the linkages between the mind and body there are, I think, pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. So the mind, I have a very clear idea of what the mind is according to my theory. Articulating it might not be as clear, but I have this idea of what it is. but I think the first thing I should say is that I think of the mind as a generation of body. It's a process of body. So I particularly try to choose words to not indicate like a separation between mind and body. And that's kind of difficult to do because in our language it's ingrained to be like my body, as if the mind is here and the body is here. So it's been interesting trying to switch around my words a little bit. I think of the self as body, the I as body, and then as a body, I generate a process of mind. So, probably I'll just try to nutshell it.
Sweet, give me one of those pecans.
Another thing that I should just emphasize is that the core musculature, the muscles in general, but I particularly focus on the core muscles, they are active, they're sensory, but they're also just continuously actively engaged and moving, gathering sensory information of inner states, felt states of being. There's mechanisms for interacting with the world. The core muscles have mechanisms for interacting with the world. So like if I put my hand on a hot stove, the sensory information is being gathered here, but there's a core reflex response. That is just a very raw mechanism of how I imagine the core musculature being connected to the other senses as the other senses gather information. I don't think it's that violent all the time. I think it actually is. It's on a spectrum. So if I touch a warm surface, there is a softer core reflex. If I see really bright light, there's a core reflex. If I see a softer light, there's a softer core reflex. And so I imagine that the core muscles are always engaged, both feeling the inner sensations of being, and then also with this mechanism being engaged by the environment around. And then you could just like get punched in the stomach, and that's going to be an outside direct hit to the core muscles experiencing something. So I think of that continuously being in dialogue with the brain, just like the other senses are in dialogue with the brain. Okay, so with that in mind, Sorry,
every time you do it, I want to do it.
Yeah, isn't this fun? I then begin to conceptualize a process that's much subtler, but those same kinds of processes are happening when I start to generate what I call mind process. Don't usually call it that. What I call it is self-generated sensory experience. That's my definition for mind, self-generated sensory experience. So I could imagine looking at the sun, and as I look at the sun as bright light, then I will move, the core muscles will move into kind of a reflexive, or will move into a state as if I were looking at a bright light, and I'm flinching from it. That's from like an imagined experience. So the body is engaging in a subtler way than if I was actually interacting with it. Depending on how robustly I can self-generate sensory experience, if I am imagining, if I have a really great ability to visualize, let's say, like I can visualize a person, and when I imagine visualizing something, I imagine that the rods and cones of my eyes are actually engaging. It's self-generated sensory experience. Maybe I could do that so well that I'm like, oh, there's a person right there, and then I start to react, and then I start to speak, and so it's just so when we designate people as like crazy, I just think of that as the most robust exercise of mind, of self-generating sensory experience. And going back on that spectrum, tick, 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 people do that to varying degrees. So that kind of exercise is just on the spectrum for me. All right, that was my nutshell.
Okay, so I want to come back because a lot of this is reminiscent of our conversation on consciousness. Mm-hmm. So it might be useful to couch consciousness within the mind and describe what other elements we might consider as part of the mind. So if I propose that if in fact consciousness is an element of the mind, mm-hmm. and then if that's an element of the mind and the mind is self-generated sensory experience, what are these other things side by side, mm-hmm. or in a hierarchy around consciousness that are components of the self-generated, like instead of saying mind, I'm going to try to start saying that whole phrase, mm-hmm. right? Self-generated sensory experience. Mm-hmm. So within self-generated sensory experience, what else do we have in addition to consciousness?
Well, I think I first want to incorporate consciousness into this process. So the mind, self-generating sensory experience. So how does now it become like a consciousness exercise? So I think, let's say, I self-generate sensory experience, there's imagined experience, and then I acknowledge that with the core posture of yes.
Ah!
Yeah.
I'm full of puns today. I have no idea. Pecans, can, shell, I don't know. I'm full of puns today, so just go with it. I don't know.
I love it though. That's so perfect. Yeah, so I self-generate sensory experience. I acknowledge it with the the yes core posture. And then let's say I reflect on that entire process, self-generated sensory experience, acknowledge it with an and then I acknowledge that with another Like that was a consciousness thing. I just acknowledged myself self-generating sensory experience. So this is kind of like I'm thinking about this, reflecting on this ability to acknowledge myself. I acknowledge that with a yes, and then I start to focus on that yes. Like, what is the yes? And I imagine that as the acknowledging component of myself. That's me. That's the acknowledger. This ability to say. But for me, it's just a core posture. It's like there's not an other. There's not an observer. It's that's I think what people interpret that to be is that it's like there's a me over here.
Hey, bud.
But I just think of it as acknowledging self-generating sensory experience with an ah. I reflect on that and acknowledge that with an ah, and then I focus on that ah. What the hell is that ah? And I'm like, that's me. And I'm like, ah.
And then suddenly it's identity.
Yeah, it's an aha moment, and I love that connection of the acknowledgement of self, of I as an aha, because it's a yes, and aha is a yes.
So like this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It looks like this!
Yeah.
Alright, so we got this. You probably got this. We'll go back here. Alright. Visual aids, everybody. So here's our sensory, our either imagined or actual sensory experience, right? Because it can be both. Correct? It can be either imagined or perceived, let me say.
Yeah.
So imagined or perceived sensory experience happens right here. And then we acknowledge it with this ah. And then the whole thing, for all of you people who love visual aids and grass and stuff, and this whole thing becomes an ah. And then, kind of looking over here, these are my really terrible eyes. This is why I'm a comic and not an artist. Oh, man. And then we get this other ah. So this is one she's talking about right here. This third one in. Number 3. Remember when we were going to get the whiteboard? Back in the day when we were going to do the whiteboard?
Oh my gosh. That's awesome. Yes.
So
your question then
go ahead.
Was what other processes besides consciousness and mind process was that?
So the process, self-generating sensory experience has within it this consciousness, and the consciousness is the ah, and the ah here very distinctly being both the process of self-generating. It's kind of repetitive, right? The process of like the self-generating, this engaging thing, plus the body. And then so instead of just going, the ah is something separate, because very easily in another theory, the ah could be something separate than a core posture of yes. It's that other over here thing, right? And so very importantly, the recognition, awareness of the function of whatever the mind is, the awareness of self-generating sensory experience still isn't abstracted.
Exactly.
And consciousness then is couched within that within the very careful integration. You cannot separate these from each other without it ceasing to function. Right? So go ahead.
From moment to moment, I bring awareness to what's happening within the core muscles, and I've concluded that from moment to moment the core muscles are continuously involved. So even in the mind process, the self-generating sensory experience process, there's a continuous activity. It just takes training to be able to move attention to it all the time. And then, yes, the process of consciousness is I would attribute that ah, that yes, to this activity in the core muscles as a core posture, ah. Whereas, as you said, many people doing philosophical work will interpret or analyze that awe experience as an abstraction. And then from there create an entire theory about how the consciousness process, how the mind process is actually an abstraction, where I would argue that it's the abstraction, the conceptualization as like an abstract thing is a tool, but it's still a visual exercise. So it's still just part of this process of self-generating sensory experience.
And I think even at the most basic level, in order to be able to have the capacity for imagining or perceiving, you must still be breathing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And these movements of breathing will affect the quality of the perception, the quality of the imagination, the emotion of the imagination, the emotion of the perception.
Mm-hmm.
So the body must be interactive no matter how much we try to reduce it.
Mm-hmm.
So here I'm trying to like come back to what I was reading this morning about the philosophy of mind. And the big conundrum in the progression of scientific technology is to try to figure out what physically actually happens. And this is like one of those big neuroscience things.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to figure out what exactly happens when we imagine things, with the most basic things. We think about a loved one, bam. Okay, that's really complicated, actually. But like, you think about fried eggs. I have no idea. Something simple.
Yeah.
And what happens there? And trying to figure out all of where the hormonal things and the sensory stimuli and like the receptors go here and then slip, synapse, blah, blah, all kinds of real important brain words.
Mm-hmm.
Just slap them in there somewhere. So most of the philosophy of mind is trying to be able to trace all the way back to the most simple unit of functioning.
Mm-hmm.
And it's contemporaneously complicated in the way that most theorists are finally coming to terms with the fact that you cannot separate the mind from being a piece. Even if we try to separate the mind and body, you cannot separate the mind from being a physical piece of mass within the structure of the body. Mm-hmm. So that paradigm has already kind of shifted, and it's coming down in together, and some gear is going to get discovered, and they'll go like, "Whoa, it's the gear!" That might not have contributed at all, but to our conversation. But it's interesting to see that even the philosophy of mind is starting to come through, and like in its monolistic and dualistic properties, and its kind of reduction theories.
Mm-hmm.
It basically from the synopses that I've read, it's coming down and going like, there's physical goop in here, right? The identity and the imagination, those aren't. I mean, what? See, this is where I have a problem with my husband, like doing his meditation, and suddenly he's in a different universe. I don't think you are. Like I just really, I don't believe it.
Right.
I can't fathom it. So like that, it super works for where he's at. It doesn't work for me at all.
Yeah.
And so trying to identify what that is, there's still, because you're baselining, basically what he's described it as, you baseline all of your normal physical things. And you're basically ignoring the awareness of, it just basically takes out that whole step that you would do otherwise. Mm-hmm. And I think that's cheating on the body a little bit.
Right. I think that if I imagine that experience of being in this different universe, there is a physical, emotional experience. It could be subtle, it could be bliss, it could be contentment, but there is still a physicality to that. And I think that the problem, the trap that people get into is not understanding what that felt experience is, and then assigning it some kind of abstraction and thinking that is actually what it is. It is not a body process. It's just a lack of connecting what is felt to the location of where it is felt and the combination, the pattern of this experience as a body experience. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
That kind of I feel bliss. What is it? I mean, people will think bliss, abstraction, and maybe as they're imagining it, they'll have this kind of awe feeling. But when I have that awe feeling, I reflect on it, I'm thinking, okay, what is being felt?
Mm-hmm.
Where is it being felt? What is the coordinated pose of this felt experience? There's never a separation for me. Before you were talking about the scientific study of mind, and it was interesting as I was thinking while you were talking about what the conceptualization of mind is. So I think people will say mind and then automatically think of the head and the brain. And I just don't. I don't think of that. I think of mind as it's a word that describes a process. And when I think of the process, I'm like, I brain, E brain, core muscles brain, you know, skin brain. I got a little song.
This is my sweet new summer jam.
A little song line going on somewhere. Yeah, that's what it's subtler, the mind process is subtler, but I could just be sitting here being like, you know, and I do. I mean, I really can be staring into space, you know, completely comatose. But I know that there's activity going on. There's a word, I use subposturing as the subtle core movement that's happening. There's a word also for speaking subtly called subvocalization.
Yeah.
And when I looked it up on Wikipedia, but I know that there's like dubious people dubious about how reliable Wikipedia is, but I just read that when measurements were taken of like the tongue movement, of the throat movement, it was measured that there was actually movement when people are talking to themselves. They're subvocalizing, there's movement happening. It's very subtle. So without like a trained awareness, you might not even notice that the tongue's like...
Which is exactly what I have to get done later, so thanks for the reminder.
As a singer, I needed to develop that awareness of that subvocalization because it was making me not be able to sing well. I would like be singing and I'd be talking to myself at the same time, saying things like, okay, here's that part. You're coming up on it. You can do it. You know, trying to give myself a pep talk, thinking that I'm this abstraction inside a body, and if I talk to myself, the abstraction, it won't do anything. It's just up here, you know, the wheels are turning, and I'm singing.
Separate.
It's like, but actually, I would be straining myself because I'm sub-vocalizing while I'm trying to vocalize, which requires this posture of ah, and this has to be down, and this has to be relaxed, and ah. I can't be like, I need to do this part of it. It's a counterproductive thing.
So that's like a super keystone example, right? Mm-hmm. Of the processes not being separate.
Mm-hmm. And that applies to a lot of different activities too. I mean, this is just helpful advice for anybody that does something. It doesn't have to be singing, it could be acting, but then it can even go into sports and stuff. If you are talking to yourself in a very kind of intense way, even though nobody else can see it, you're like, okay, I got to do this. I'm going to get up to bat and I'm about ready to hit the ball and you can do it. And you're physically, the core musculature is actively engaged in this emotional and speaking process. which could be very counterproductive to this activity, to this exercise of being able to engage the core musculature in such a way that you're coordinating the entire body in one smooth movement so that you can do what you need to do.
So in that case, it would be like, I'm thinking, because I played baseball / softball.
Yeah.
So you basically, when you're up to bat, basically visualizing, and this you have to do it when you're on deck. You can't necessarily, for me, I wasn't very successful if I did it once I got to the plate. You basically can only do it while you're on deck and then timing the pitches. Because once you actually step to the plate, if you're sub-posturing your visualization of the triple that you need to hit for the cycle, if you sub-posture that, it basically, if that's not the pitch you're expecting, like, you just really have to be reactive. You really have to, like, just trust your muscle memory of the 7 billion zillion times you've done it. So you sub-posture basically when you're on deck. And then once you get to the plate, then you just have to kind of loose it out. And then, like, the trying too hard, because, like, there are times when my coach would say, like, Amanda, now you're batting left-handed. And I'd be like, Jesus Christ, coach, what the fuck is that? What? It's like, you're just trying too hard. Because I was basically over posturing, like, and they'd be too robust. Because I really knew that I could hit this girl. I knew I could hit her hard. I knew I could hit it where I wanted to hit it, and I was just over posturing, right? So then I had to, like, break all my idea about posturing, and I don't even know where my arms are supposed to be, and then try left-handed, like, what? So that's a cool reminder in the way that you're constantly having body processes communicate with perceptive and imaginative processes. And they influence each other. Your posture of your core can mimic the imagination, and then it kind of keeps cycling in because the experience gets more realistic for you. Or if you're imagining, it just starts to cycle through. And they kind of feed each other, I think. Does that make sense? How would you define that?
Well, I think I was just thinking about transitioning into what the purpose of the mind is.
Oh, great! Let's do it.
Because when let's say I'm needing to plan for something, and I'm planning in a room by myself so that I have the ability to very much exercise the mind without much distraction going on. And then after I move through this planning process, then I can go out into the world and just be like, here's my plan. I have this self-generated, clear sensory experience. This is what I want. And perhaps it will require what is outside to change, and delivering communicating a procedure for how to now make something new happen to people or whatever. So I think that the mind is this ability to self-generate sensory experience is partly so we can just plan stuff. But when you're in the moment with like playing sports or something, I think that transitioning from being able to self-generate sensory experience into immediately taking in the environment as it is essential. I just think that for people who do self-generate sensory experience a lot and are really good at it, those are more of the planning people that need to spend a lot of time by themselves. Self-generate, and then you come out and be like, hi, this is my idea, this is what we need to do.
And then the me, on the other hand, don't plan anything and then just go with it, and then you can't be disappointed or whatever.
Right. Does that's you?
It's sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes. And it might just be out of the complication of my mom's suicide. So, like, I don't know. But the more I seem to plan things, the less I perceive that I actually experience things. And I'm less impressed with myself. If I plan something and do it, I go like, well, duh. And if I don't plan something and come to something and do something with it, then I go like, all right, that was cool. Nice. Good job, me. Way to not fuck it up again.
Right.
Or whatever. I'm not always fucking it up. Jesus.
I have to say, I really agree with that. Like the implication that sitting by yourself planning stuff before you go out and do stuff is not the best way. I just kind of think of the mind as it's a big deal, but it's not really that big of a deal. It's not like this, that the pyramid at the top. You're like, we're able to do this. I think that is a great tool. This
just came into my head. Also, the reason, the kind of long-standing idea about the mind is what's up. Don't you know you want some more mind in your mind? Mind your mind, yeah. So that also kind of it's a big. Well, I would propose that it's kind of a big fat lie to ourselves to make us feel superior to everything else, as if everything else isn't capable of having mind. Sure, we can believe that everything else has a brain, but not everything else has a mind, right? Because the mind, consciousness. Are you telling me that, if a crow picks up a something and goes that's not quite shiny enough, they might not think that's not quite shiny enough because they think in a different language than we do. Duh. Probably, I hope. That'd be a little weird, right? Hey, crow, you just wanted to talk to me the whole time and you just didn't know how to use your tongue? But it's like the superiority complex. The idea of mind and the kind of the fascination with mind, I think gives the human species this superiority complex. And then they also consider that different types of humans have different caliber minds. And it's not about the mind. If we can deconstruct the superiority of the mind, we, by definition, deconstruct a form of superiority.
I think I liked the idea of the crow. We are able to assign words to stuff. And that
is a huge problem.
It's a great way to organize and kind of disseminate ideas to many people, through words. You can have an idea, you can put it into words, you can plaster it all over billboards all over the country, and everybody is going to be reading the words and then having these self-generated sensory experiences based on the words that they read. It's a powerful tool, and it's something that animals don't do. So with that tool, we've been able to organize huge amounts, huge groups of people, and have a lot of organization to create society and all that kind of stuff. I just am mindful of of the fact that the words are representations of experiences, experiences that we have, and also experience of these sensory perceptions, objects. But the words they're symbols, they're representations.
Yeah.
And kind of going into that observation of the superiority complex that we have, I think that the words, our ability to form language, is also at the kind of the top part of that hierarchy of self.
I think other species are very well adept at communication, and they don't necessarily require the construction of language in order to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, reading core postures, which can.
I'm thinking about ants. For some reason, I'm totally thinking about ants, and just fair, like sense, and or B's it's like dance, don't you wanna dance? And then it's just like all the birds of paradise, and there's also dancing, super complicated stuff. Right. But it's like super communicative. It's like you got man, what is he doing? Do I want to get on to jump his bones? Let him jump my bones. What's going on? Are you going to succeed? Are you going to cheat on me? Stupid flamingos, whatever. So it's really it's just a different methodology of communication, and I think it can be necessarily as complex as languages, and it might be more purified form. Because we as a species, because we're one species, right? And different species of birds have all these different calls. We're one species of Homo erectus, grotescus. And we have like tons and tons of different languages, and those languages have dialects and whatever. So even the necessity for language comes out of like a it's cultural. Like language is very cultural, and it's representative of the way that we understand the process of self-generated experience.
Mm-hmm. Was that your beeper going off for 11 o'clock?
It's 11!
11 o'clock, alright. Well, that was good. I'm trying to do like shorter sessions, so that was on the mind. Is that good? We can stop here and then...
Yeah, and then there like some of this is just good, it's kind of rehashing, but just very important to kind of, because I feel like this is, it's not deja vu, because I know we've talked about this stuff like a multitude of times, but it's just very important to kind of rehash, even if it seems repetitive. Repetition necessarily isn't bad, but just because this is kind of this is one of the linchpins of the whole theory. So
yeah, great. Well, we're going to do another one, but for now, that was our talk on the mind. My name is Madeline McNeill, and this is Amanda Maule, and thanks for watching.
Word, yeah. Thank you.